Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the When the Cleats Come Off podcast. I'm here with someone that I met back in college. He was a sports psychologist for me, and I got to know him really well at Purdue. Dr. Carr, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. Glad to be here.
This is going to be so much fun. But for those people that maybe don't know what you're up to, you just have a new gig. You're with the Green Bay Packers now, which is so awesome. Can you guide us through, what got you into sports psychology and maybe your journey to get to where you are today?
Sure. I mean, the older I get, the longer it takes, so I'll try to keep it brief. But it I was a Division III college football player. Played at Wabash College in Indiana. Um, I was a psychology major because I loved the field of psychology, but never thought about continuing it past undergrad. Actually finished my undergraduate and I went to Ball State University. I could live home, I could get a graduate degree, and I was a graduate assistant football coach. At one point, I thought I was going to go into coaching. So I did counseling psychology as my master's because I thought, well, of all the psychology disciplines, I liked helping. I've been an FCA camp counselor. I wanted to be in a helping profession. So I thought maybe I'd be a high school football coach and guidance counselor. It wouldn't hurt. And as paths go, I did the counseling field, and one of my practicums was in an addictions treatment unit, and I found it really challenging. And that was back in the day when a graduate assistant coach literally cut film strips and did really boring stuff, and I wasn't getting to coach on the field. And I think there was a destination, there was a plan, power greater than me kind of said, no, I think you're going to be better in psychology. So I finished my master's. I worked 4 years with adolescent drug and alcohol treatment, and I worked with kids that were in a hospital for 6 weeks because of their addictions. I started doing prevention work, and I had friends who were coaches, and someone mentioned sports psychology, and I had never really heard of the field, and this was after I got my master's. I knew there were psychologists that could help athletes, but I found out that most people calling themselves sports psychologists were either not a psychologist, which that's not cool because psychology is a licensed profession. You're
Right.
basically breaking the law if you call yourself one.
Yes.
Or B, they were a psychologist who maybe played little league baseball or high school sports and thought that was sport knowledge. And sports
Mm,
psychology is a whole different discipline. So, long story short, went back, got my PhD in counseling psychology, and did my minor in sport and exercise psychology. So I did the academic preparation while I was training as a counseling psychologist. Spent the third year of my PhD at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. And then my whole goal was to be a psychologist that works with athletes. And for the past almost 30 years, that's what I've been doing. So um, went from Washington State to Arizona State to Ohio State to back home to Indiana to working with Purdue and developing their sports psych program, um, developing program at Indiana University, working with Ball State, Butler. And then I was still working with Olympic sports. I've been to 2 Olympic Games, worked with the Kansas City Royals for 6 years, started working in the NBA, worked with the Indiana Pacers. And then what happened is I was at St. Vincent Sports Performance in Indianapolis is I started doing consulting with the Green Bay Packers and coming in about 10 days a month, working with the team, the players, the coaching staff, the organization. And then at the end of last season, end of 2019, they approached me about being full-time. The NFL currently has 5 teams that have full-time psychologists as their team mental health team psychologist. Now, my title here is a director of performance psychology, and I'm the team's behavioral health clinician. So I don't separate between all performance and mental health over here. To me, it's a human being. They're young men, and their whole span varies between having to be an elite football player on Sundays to dealing with relationships. And so for me as a psychologist to be able to understand the performance psychology tools, I do a lot of education with our position groups, with our team. We have materials available on the iPads that every player has. I do individual consulting. Everything is confidential because I'm a licensed psychologist. It's part of my ethics and my role. And then I coordinate all the mental health resources in the community and work with our sports medicine staff. So it's really an exciting opportunity to be in an NFL organization and to really, just like sports medicine has evolved in strength and conditioning and sports nutrition, to bring the performance psych piece. So this is my first year in the full-time role and I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, that's so much fun. And I just remember sitting in your office at Purdue talking about the crazy things that, actually at the time I was playing professionally, going through a lot of things, and you've heard all the things. And a lot of people who have tuned into the podcast have heard some of the things because I feel like sharing a part of my journey can maybe help someone else. And so
Yeah.
because you got to know me so well, I feel like there were things that I could share with you because of the relationship that we built. I wasn't sharing all the deep things day one, but I was sharing a lot of things that were just going on in my brain. So if you could just, I don't know, tell me what maybe the common questions athletes maybe come up with you with are there a couple that are just like, yeah, you hear this one a lot, or you're talking about relationships, do you hear about that a lot? What are some of the common questions you hear from
Well,
athletes?
in the past many years of my practice, I would say that, there's a whole variety of reasons that get someone into my door. Being in this position full time, being at practices full time, it gives me an opportunity to have informal chats. Being in the training room, just being in the weight room. Now, obviously, COVID is a whole different deal, and it's really kind of
Yeah.
put a blanket over everything we can do. But fortunately, I had built up a little bit of a deposit with the team for the majority, and it's always changing. Rosters change, um, but I think players know that I'm here as a resource. But in my career, I'd say what typically gets an athlete in my office is they're just not performing in their sport.
Mm,
They're either noticing there's a lot of anxiety or they have a lot of self-doubt, like they're not feeling as confident as they were. And sometimes confidence issues are just a matter of process. A really elite high school travel ball athlete that commits to a Division I program sees the accomplishment of a dream, and then all of a sudden they get into that Division I program, and the ball's moving faster at them, and the all the players are quicker and stronger, and making that adjustment. Of course, you're going to have some doubt, but that confidence may be impacted not just on the field, but maybe in a relationship, maybe in their family dynamic. And that kind of what scares me a little bit with folks that don't have the counseling or the clinical training is, um, where they say, well, I just deal with the performance side. And Sean McCann's a good friend of mine. He's a clinical psychologist. He's the senior sports psychologist for the U.S. Olympic Committee. He's been there for over 25 years. And I know he was interviewed one time during an Olympic Games, and they asked him when he's at the Olympics, are you dealing with more performance issues or more personal issues? And he said, everything is about performance.
yeah.
And that's how I view kind of that relationship. So as a psychologist, and you develop a therapeutic relationship, and it takes time to develop trust, and you can't just demand it. Um, and it's really based on the process of the athlete. The athlete who gets something out of our work together, they do so because of the investment they put into it.
Hmm.
Um, I think our field, it's just my pet peeve. Our field likes to, I think, well, I don't have websites. I don't have links. I don't have that. I think your best work is reputation. And I think your best work is the athletes trust that you're confidential. And it's great when someone shares their experiences. We've had some veteran players on this roster here in Green Bay share experiences publicly and within the team that have helped validate and support my role. But it's not because of me, it's because of their work and the gains they get. So, um, I think it takes time and a commitment and trust, and that's not always easy.
Yeah.
So I want to be very clear. It's not just about throwing a mental skills technique at someone and then it sticks and now their batting average increases 30%. It doesn't do it that way.
Right.
Usually when an athlete finds a really good performance and they've had an appointment, they come and they're excited and it's like, well, you just found something you already had.
Hmm.
I didn't give you anything new. Um, I learned almost 40 years ago when I was doing addictions treatment, and it was through my own growth as a therapist, was um, if I was going to take credit for every patient I worked with that got sober, I needed to take credit for everybody that relapsed.
Right.
You couldn't have it both ways.
Yes.
And I think our field is kind of like, oh, well, they worked with this team and this team won conference or this team won state. They must be pretty good. Well, the team is pretty good. The sports psych person may have been a nice resource, but they didn't win the state or Big Ten because of them.
Right.
And I think you're uh, the athletes you work with have to understand, just like you're a resource, but the more they put themselves into learning the skills, the more they'll take out of it. And I find that most athletes come in, and I've watched it generations now, decades I've been doing it. More and more athletes just they come in because they know the mental part is so important and they have a resource and they want to get better with it. So those are the fun athletes to work with.
Yeah, I think it's crazy when I work with maybe a new athlete and, initially they're coming in to get better at hitting, for example.
Mhm.
They're like, I need to fix my hitting. I need to fix my hitting. I'm not performing. And it's funny how you see people or you used to see more people come in when they weren't performing. But now you're seeing people come in because they realize that you're part of the puzzle, that
Yeah,
you can help them think in a better way. And I take a lot of pride in as a hitting coach because I'm not teaching. I mean, I'm teaching how to be a better hitter, yes, but you're not going to be able to perform in the box without the belief and, people supporting you that you can do this. You can believe that
right.
you can. And it took me, by the way, our work together, it took me a year and a half to truly put that work and see it happen for me in the professional field. And it eventually did. And as soon as that moment clicked for me, it was like lights out. I finally knew what I was capable of again. Because I was in a pretty bad place when I started meeting with you, and you know that. But we went over some tactics that I loved: meditation, breath work, and a lot of visualization. And I know a lot of people can benefit from those things that I'm sure you're working with your professional players with now on those three things. Can you like elaborate,
Yeah.
what those things are and how they benefit athletes?
I there's a lot of sports psych books, right? You
Yeah.
can find a lot of baseball books, ball sports in particular. Um, and I've always kind of said if you took the whole library of books and you just squeezed them all, they'd all kind of say the same thing. The field and discipline academically of sports psychology, we really haven't kept up on the research as much as we should. And unfortunately, it's because our academic institutions haven't really embraced sports psychology as an academic discipline. And the people who are working in the field are pretty proprietarial. They're going to protect their stuff. Um, all of my interventions are evidence-based, practice-based. I like reading journals. Maybe that's the little nerd in me that likes to keep up to date with research because I think it's important enough that if I'm going to recommend an intervention to an athlete, that I have some confidence that it's a useful tool.
Yeah.
But I like to start simple. So there's kind of just some four basics or four ingredients that I talk about really having a good routine. Um, the first one I consider with all my clients is journaling,
Mm,
which really impacts self-awareness. Because the more self-aware you become as an individual, the more you hold yourself accountable.
yeah.
If you have parents that come in, and oftentimes the parents are the ones that say, "Hey, you need to go work with Ashley," and which is awesome. A parent's trying to find a support, trying to provide resources for their daughter or their son to kind of get better. That's not problematic. But if that individual, that young athlete doesn't take it to heart for themselves, it's probably not going to be very effective.
Right.
And I know that my daughter was a competitive gymnast and was Division I athlete, competed in college gymnastics, and she knew where there were times I was kind of talking like dad, and there were times that I was trying to share tools. I think journaling is such an important process because the very kind of first mental skill that you can incorporate in journaling is goal setting. And to me, goal setting represents action based behavior because even if you set a goal that I'm going to write in my journal 2 times a week, or I'm going to set a goal of doing 10 minutes of relaxation before I go to my lift or before I go to my hitting drills, if I can be goal directed and set controllable goals, I can measure my progress. And it also what kind of brings my motivation along. Some athletes at this level or elite level I've worked with are just talented, and they're talented just when they show up. So they've got a God-given ability to be fast, quick, strong, whatever. And when they get to some level of their athletic development, they'll be challenged on that.
Hmm.
And that's where I think you have to start working on the mental piece. So to me, journaling and goal setting are kind of like they go hand in hand. As a matter of fact, even here in my office, I have a bunch of these notebooks. And
Hmm.
so when I start working with a player, there's your journal. I start,
Here's mine.
I, yeah, see, I give this to these guys, and people say, well, these guys aren't good. Yeah, they're really good with it. The second mental skill that you have to put in your toolbox is basically energy management,
Mm.
controlling your butterflies.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into the physiology of athletic movement. And if I can summarize it simply in ball sports, and I know that's what you work with, I had 6 years with a Major League Baseball team. When you get ready to compete in a sport where failure is predominant, and it's kind of like the difference. I remember when I was interviewing with the Royals and I went to dinner with George Brett, who's now, unfortunately, generations now don't know George Brett, but George Brett is in the Baseball Hall of Fame, played for the Royals his entire career. He was a heck of a hitter. Um, I said, what's the toughest thing a professional baseball player has to deal with mentally? I was asking. And I'd worked with college athletes, obviously, but not professionals. And he didn't even hesitate when he said failure. He said, Doc, if I have 100 at bats and I fail 70 times, I'm in the all-star game and I'm making a lot of money. He said, however, if I take every failed at bat back to the dugout with me, I don't get out of the minor leagues. And it was this concept of how do you deal with a sport where sometimes a pitcher's going to throw you something you didn't expect. They're going to hit the corner and you're going to strike out. It doesn't mean you're a bad hitter. But what happens is athletes get so paralyzed with anxiety and nervousness about performing well. And that's a very, very kind of common central nervous system fight or flight mechanism. We can't change it, but you can teach yourself how to control it. And the way you do that is you teach yourself relaxation, mindfulness exercises. And I tell athletes I work with 4 to 5 times a week, 15 to 20 minutes of practice with a relaxation exercise where you are fully invested in teaching your body how to relax by slowing your
Mm.
breathing, lowering your pulse. And the whole purpose of the exercise is to achieve what we call the relaxation response, where you kind of have this very centered feeling. It's just like weight training. The more you practice it, the easier it is to apply it. So the more you lift, the stronger you get, the bat speed increases. They all work together. Well, relaxation helps us to learn. We don't want to get rid of butterflies. We just want to teach them how to fly in formation.
Ooh.
And you're going to have that moment where you know that you're either going to pinch hit or you're going up to bat and there's 2 outs and bases loaded. You're down by 2 runs. It's the ability to center, to focus. That's going to be key for an athlete at any level. Plus, if I learn how to manage my anxiety, I think it helps keep my balance. So that's the second skill. The third one is basically what we call focus and concentration skills. And that's where visualization and imagery come in.
Mm.
Now, the reason I have that as the third skill is because if you try to visualize when you're anxious and nervous, you will close your eyes and see the fail outcome or the negative outcome about 80% of the time.
Wow.
So you'll visualize swinging and missing, you'll visualize throwing a ball outside of the strike zone. But if you're calm and you're centered and you're focused, because we know that relaxation enhances imagery use, the research has shown that. So I really try to get athletes to practice the relaxation. So, for example, when I do a visualization exercise, it's going to be 25 minutes. But that first 13 minutes is just going to be the relaxation piece. And then once you're relaxed, visualize being in the moment. And if I was working with a hitter, I don't think you have to visualize 3 at bats. I think you visualize 1 at bat, 4 to 5 pitches, and incorporate the kinesthetics, the feel. I know when I worked with baseball guys, if they were pitchers, they would actually hold a ball in their hand while they were visualizing. So when they were visualizing a 2-seam fastball or they were visualizing a change and how they would change the grip, they would adjust it so kinesthetically they could feel it while they were doing the relaxation.
Wow. Can I
But it
interject there with a
Sure.
story?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
It's crazy to think. I remember some of my best at bats that I've ever had in my collegiate career. And every single one of those at bats were because I was thinking about one of my best performances I've ever had.
Mhm,
Like I was literally in the box and relaxed because I was imagining that 3 for 4 game that I had against UCLA where I felt loose. This is what my bat felt like in my hand. And like
mhm,
putting myself back into that moment allowed me to just ball out and play well because I simply just went back to a moment where I was very successful. But that wasn't until my senior year. So it clearly is something that, later on, and I know I shared with you, I studied sports psychology was a class that I had my senior year.
mhm.
And that was when I first started adopting some of these practices. And that was one of them. And I can truly attest that that is something that will, once you understand those first two elements first, and you can really apply that visualization and the imagery, like that is it's one of my favorite things that I had as an athlete. And it truly, and I know people aren't going to have to be convinced because you're amazing and people are probably soaking this up like a sponge, but that is one of my favorite practices, and that's just a simple example of how that really does work. So
Well, and it's not uncommon for an athlete at this level I work with, say they've done imagery in the past or visualization. And I always ask them, how much relaxation do you do before you visualize?
mm,
And quite often they have to think about it. And I always encourage them, add about 5 to 10 minutes of relaxation first. Because if we're stressed or if we're in, see, I don't believe in the word slump. I think slump is just a word people use as an excuse for their next bad at bat.
mm,
Because the reality is, when you say you're in a slump, because maybe you're 0 for 10 or 0 for 15, it does not change your next at bat. The pitcher can't move in closer. They don't give you a little mini bat to hit with. You don't start with an 0-2 count. It's the same performance scenario. The only thing that's different is you have heightened anxiety, increased self-doubt, more tension in your body. And any hitter knows the tighter they feel in their shoulders and arms, the less bat velocity swing they have. They're not as in control. And when a batter says they're struggling to make contact, that doesn't exude confidence in their abilities. And
right.
most really good hitters will tell you that the balls that go 400, 500 feet, and the balls that fly out of the ballpark were easy swings. And that's, to me, you engender and create that by practicing your mental skills. And so, if you're doing the journaling and goal setting, which is kind of step one, you're practicing the energy management relaxation, step two, then you're doing the focus and concentration skills. Now, that includes techniques like having a cue word, like every time you step in the batter's box, finding a cue word that you can kind of anchor in. Imagery, cue words, mental routines are all kind of incorporated in that concentration. And then the fourth one that I talk about, which is basically having routines, having structured, but not written in stone, structured but flexible
Mm-hmm.
mental routines. And and the idea of a routine is it generates that sense of confidence, composure, and concentration that's needed to do the task. And in ball sports like baseball and softball, there's a lot of standing time. There's a lot of sitting time in
Yes.
between these moments of intensity. And so you have to have a routine that kind of gears you up. Otherwise, you're likely to kind of fall into the mood. And hitters know that, because if they've had two bad at bats, oftentimes they're either stepping in their third at bat with a self-defeating thought that they can't hit this girl, or they're thinking, um, why aren't they pinch hitting for me? Or I'm going to change it now. And now they're going to break it, instead of just taking one pitch at a time and having their trusted routine. And there's all kinds of texts and journals. And to be honest, when I present this to athletes and say, here's the four things that we're going to work on, it's a handout that's in our mental training manual that we use here in Green Bay. This is where you get started. And typically, if I see an athlete for a first time, say a high school athlete, and they come and meet with me and they say they want to get better, and I don't see them for 4 to 6 weeks.
Mm,
And I give them a very clear expectation: journaling 2 to 3 times a week, do the relaxation 3 to 4 to 5 times a week, start practicing the imagery, and we give them a script. And then I encourage them to start finding kind of mental routines and then write down those routines. And then I'll see you in a month. And they either come back with nothing, which tells me now it's a motivation issue,
mm,
because I'm not giving you anything that you can't do. but I can't do it for you. And that's the key, because I think motivation is what drives the ability to apply the skills. Just think of it this way. If I ask a group of, now we can say professional because I've worked a lot with professional athletes, but when I stand in front of a professional team and ask them from 0 to 100%, what percent of your sport is mental? I'm not gonna get anything less than 90%, and most of the time they're gonna say 95 to almost all of it. So question 2, of all the performance mistakes you make, what percent of your mistakes are mental mistakes? Now, what does that mean? It means I can do it, but I didn't do it when I had to, but I have the ability to do it, right? So if you're a 12-year-old hitter, you're still developing physical strength and you're still developing skills. So maybe getting a ball out of the infield isn't where you're at technically right now. You're more of a slapper. You get the ball down, you're going to do different things. But the reality is, if I'm talking to elite athletes, they're going to say all of their mistakes are mental mistakes because they can do the skill. They can catch a football. They can make a tackle. They can make a play on the ball. They know they have the ability to do it. So if your sport is 90% mental and your mistakes are almost all mental, the third question I ask them is, of all the time you spend training, what percent do you do mental training? If you've just acknowledged that it's 90% or more mental, do you spend that much time doing that? Those 4 things I mentioned, if an athlete commits themselves to those interventions and those techniques, and I'm talking intentional practice, not think about it, intentional practice.
Hmm.
I'm not talking about mom and dad making me go to my room and having me do it. I'm saying I do it on my own without prodding because it's important to me. It's going to take about 25 to 30 minutes a day. That's your time commitment. So when I ask a group room of professional athletes, whether it was Indiana Pacers or any team I've worked with, and I say, how many of you would say that if you were doing something different than you've ever done your whole athletics career for 25 minutes a day, and it helps you make just one less mental mistake every game you compete, how many of you would say it's worth it? How many hands raise?
Probably all of them.
Every single one.
Yeah.
And then I ask them, then why am I only going to be working with 30% of you?
Ooh.
See, this is the challenge about sports psychology. It's not about someone doing something to you, and so now they're elite and excellent. It's really about the athlete making a choice. How am I going to use this resource? If Ashley Burkhart has some really good hitting drills and some good techniques, I'm going to pull from that. I'm going to learn from that. She may not be my only hitting coach in my career, but I'm going to pull from her and kind of implement how. And if a sports psychologist that I work with, or a strength coach, or a nutritionist, I need to take that information and then apply it and be intentional about my practice. And I think sports psychology suffers a little bit where people think it's all kind of guru and gimmicks, and I'm going to flush the toilet and it's all going to go away. And there's all kinds of things that are metaphors and represents. Uh, I'm a little bit more pragmatic, I think. It's kind of the way I process how I work with the athletes I work with. And the reason you got success yourself was because of your intentional commitment over time to the process. But beyond those 4 things, everything else is just kind of a subscale intervention that fits underneath one of those 4 domains.
That's awesome. And I love that breakdown. I really hope people are having their journals wide open right now and are taking notes, because I've already taken probably too many, if that's a thing. And I'm loving this conversation so much. I really am interested to see, what do you think? Well, why is there a stigma? Why is there a stigma around sports psychology?
Yeah, I think psychology in general is a stigma, because I think people think there's something wrong with you,
Hmm.
that there's something wrong with you. That's why you need to go see a psychologist. But I don't hear athletes say, I'm going to go do my weight workout. Oh, you must be really weak physically, or you must be really slow runner. You must be very awkward and not very biomechanically efficient. No, you just go to a strength coach because it's part of what you do as an athlete to develop yourself. I think psychology is there's just a societal stigma to it. And to be honest, I was at Ohio State University for 5 years as a psychologist for their athletic department. Um, if every single athlete at Ohio State wanted to take advantage, they said, "Oh, I've got this person who's been to world championships. He's worked with elite athletes, and I can go see him for free." Um, we did a calculation one day. Some of the athletes would have had a 2-year wait list to get in.
Mm,
So it's almost kind of right now where psychology is. It's kind of built to address the people who are either in crisis and need an intervention, or someone who's really self motivated. Um, One of the things I do is put together materials so athletes don't have to go and buy 10 books. They have very simple exercises and skills that they can incorporate, and then they can utilize me as a resource. I would say though, Ashley, in the length of time I've been in this career, I think the stigma is not as big. And I see a lot more receptivity. Even my team presentation, I've done 2 team talks this year here. It's very well received. Um, We've had elite players on our team speak publicly about the importance of mental health. I know that about a month or so ago, before he was injured, Dak Prescott from the Dallas Cowboys talked about it. There's a very powerful, moving statement by a tight end for the Atlanta Falcons who has his own foundation now, Hayden Hurst. And
yeah.
our quarterback has even been very public about his support. And there wasn't a better validation for me than when the Packers had their press release about me being brought on full time, that, some of our veteran players were tweeting it out and supportive. So I see it changing in a very good way. I worry about my discipline, frankly, and some people that want to take credit for the success of an athlete. Um, I just want to be really good at what I do. So when athletes utilize me, they can be really good. But I'm an old offensive lineman. I like being behind the scenes. I like doing the work without recognition. Of course, I grew up and I trained in an era that didn't have social media. There wasn't websites. There wasn't. So your reputation was your best marketing.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm not really